today. So, where are you, Laura? Oh, right there. Okay, good. Just want to make sure I'm introducing the person I remember. So I probably first met Laura over 15 years ago. In fact, you weren't even at American Rivers yet. You were.
I was at
Marsh.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure I was sent to her early on as I got interested in dams and dam removal as one of the people who knew a lot. But have you ever seen this book called All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten? So my version of that book on this topic is All I Really Need to Know About Dam Removal I Learned from Laura Wildman. It's not a bestseller, but sometimes it takes a while for those things to kick in. And since I definitely got sent to her, like, you got to go see her. She knows a lot about this, and boy, were they right. There's another kind of a reference point here, which is everybody. You probably think about Oracle. Where's Sean Smith? So is Oracle? Is that the owner of Oracle? Is the guy who buys the America's Cup boat and it costs $1 billion and they win? Well, anyway, the old version of Oracle was in Greek mythology, right, where an oracle was a person considered to provide wise counsel or prophetic predictions inspired by the gods. As such, it's a form of divination. And I thought, well, that's kind of like going to Laura's, like going to an oracle about dam removal.
My kids don't think it's so cool.
But then I realized maybe she herself is a god. And as Bridie McGreevy knows, to a group of about 200 plus students this time last year, I actually referred to Laura as the goddess of dam removal. And I listened for, this is a pretty sharp group of students, a lot of them, and given that my statement went unchallenged, I think we should just declare once and for all that Laura is the goddess of dam removal. So welcome, Laura. She actually has she went to school too, of all things. I think you can be born into being a goddess or god, but it didn't happen to me. Probably. Good point, Roger. A Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering, Master's of Environmental Management at Yale, and currently, just like she doesn't have enough stuff going on, including, by the way, her spa party for how big a group of 12-year-olds on Saturday?
Yeah, 10, 12-year-olds.
Yeah, that too, which actually is related to
a lot of dam removal.
hydrology, yeah, exactly. She's currently on top of everything else doing a PhD at the University of Southampton. But what's interesting to me is very solutions-oriented, but has done this in more than one place. She's done it in the consulting world, where she was before American Rivers, but in American Rivers where she was for about 8 years, which at the time I would say was the lead NGO in the country focused on dam removal, and I happened to be a science advisor to them at that same time. And then now the director of the New England Regional Office of Princeton Hydro, which is a leading firm. And I think that experience out what I'll call in the real world, not to be rude to the rest of us as academics who think we live in the real world, solutions and decisions and getting things done really matter there. So it's a really good test bed for our work, like how well can we use what we do to make sense in that world. So it's just a great pleasure to have you here today, Laura. Thanks. Get you started. Yeah. Stop it.
So Princeton Hydro sounds a little odd, right? Going from American Rivers to Princeton Hydro, you probably think I put up hydro dams now. But we don't do any hydro. Matter of fact, my company was so unaware that the word hydro was synonymous with hydroelectric that they called themselves Princeton Hydro, meaning more water-related. So we do all ecological restoration, and we have a name that makes it sound like we put in hydro plants, which we don't. Which I have to explain to many people who call me, asking me to try to put hydro on their dam. So I'm not really the right person to talk to about that. Okay, so let's get started. I am going to talk to you today about a few things, mainly a paper that I'm working on right now for my PhD, looking at the proactive dam removal movement, the evolution of this movement over the last 25 years, and what's kind of led up to that. It's a pretty broad, generalized talk, And I've had wonderful conversations today with about 10 of the folks from the Mitchell Center here. So any one of these slides we could go into a lot more detail on, and that's how I felt my discussions were this morning. You could have just picked one of the slides and we talked for a good hour about that topic alone. This is broader though, so keep in mind that this is a broader talk. We're going to talk a little bit about just background history stuff. Most stuff's going to seem pretty obvious. Some of the drivers of dam removal. Then we'll talk about this timeline, just kind of how this evolved over the last 25 years. And then we'll end with kind of what we're learning now, who's doing some of the primary research right now, and areas where maybe we need some more policy and research still moving forward. But that's just last few slides at the very end, mainly because David wanted me to make sure we talked about that stuff. So, first of all, my own background, I've been involved in probably about anywhere from 100 to 200 dam removal projects, probably closer on the 200 end around the country. Primarily in the Northeast, but I've worked on projects all over this country, and now I'm working on efforts in Europe as well, on their dam removal efforts. But it starts much earlier than that in my family, and this is my great-grandfather, who was known as a fisherman on the Salton Verde rivers in Arizona. In his obituary, he said he was a great guy. Raleigh is a fella you can ride the river with. He was also on the survey crew for the Roosevelt Dam, the first one of the first really big ones that was going on out there. And then my grandfather built dams. So I was raised in a house with all these pictures of dams around. And I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be an engineer because, first of all, yellow equipment moving around a construction site just really fascinated me. It's one of those kids I could just spend hours watching construction sites. So I knew I wanted to be an engineer. I ended up becoming a civil water resource engineer, just like my grandfather. I was raised with all these pictures of his dams. I thought I wanted to do something similar and go and leave these huge monoliths behind me so that my grandchildren could see what I did. I became a structural engineer, actually. My emphasis was structural. And then I got my first job and absolutely hated it. Couldn't stand it. Decided I was definitely not interested in this career. I didn't like what we were doing as civil engineers, and I almost left engineering until my first project came around with fisheries. It was about the impacts a dam was having on the fisheries population downstream. And I've always been born and raised a fisherman in my family. Once I found that there was a way I could bring my love of fisheries and rivers together and my interest in engineering and combine the two, that's what really got me excited. So instead of building huge dams, I am a specialist, oddly enough, now worldwide, on the removal of dams. So that's what I do. I focus on removing dams. Different time, different period. All the Salton Verde River fish that he fished for were annihilated by my grandfather, who then brought water to Phoenix, Arizona, and allowed us to develop in an area we probably shouldn't have been developing in. And then I came in, and now I'm looking at removing them. I'm hoping the cycle doesn't go full-fledged and then my daughter starts building them again, but we will see. You never know. So one thing, this has a big green thing on it, but this one doesn't, so that's good. Okay, one thing is, a lot of people think like dam removal is a new thing. Well, dam removal is not a new thing. We've been building dams pretty much as long as civilization has existed. I think it's almost instinctually in us. I don't know how many of you did this. I did this. I went out to one of my dam removal sites the other day and some kid had done this. I'm pushing him out of the way. Are you kidding me? It took tons of time to take this thing out. But there are, some of the earliest deciphered writings discuss in them. If you're too lazy to keep your dam in good condition, you're going to have to be liable for anything that happens if the thing breaches. I mean, this is way, way back when we were talking about this kind of infrastructure. And we have been removing them for probably just about as long. People act like this is a very new thing, but not necessarily. One of the oldest dams that this remains still exist breached very soon after it was built. Now, did they breach it themselves, or did it just breach catastrophically? But they believe it breached very soon after construction because there was no sediment deposits that were built up behind it that they could find, any kind of legacy deposits there. So there's likely been removals and breaches. I've been looking for really old examples where I knew it was a deliberate removal. Here's one, although I threw this out in a class in Wesleyan, and within like seconds, some millennial with a computer found an older one. So if there are people like that in this crowd, I'm the kind of person that's really interested in that. So please email me if you find examples older, because that kid said he was going to email me and he never did, so I don't have it. I can't find it. So this one was around 331 BC when Alexander the Great was leading his forces up the valley of the Tigris, and he was removing the dams along the way to make a navigational corridor. So he was moving the troops as the river provided his navigational corridor. They later rebuilt them, and they were irrigation dams. But I know that they were deliberately removed. And, this came up. So this is a dam in my own town, actually just walking distance from my office, a series of 2 dams. And when I was standing in the checkout line, I was thumbing through the history of our town and came across this picture of them blowing up that dam in 1904. So obviously, again, a deliberate dam removal in 1904 in my town, this time because they were making way for a new dam that then never got constructed. So it was just removed and then never rebuilt. All different reasons why we were removing them back when. What I'm going to talk a little bit more is the proactive, more environmental movement that we've had recently. So part of looking at the history is kind of the transition of our laws and what we considered important. Very early on in America, and this happens to be a law from England, we had a lot of laws protecting fisheries. So when you built a dam on a river, you had to make sure it was left open seasonally for the fish or something. And they had this one, the King's Gap Law, which defined, I'm sure a few of you read it already because I heard some laughing. But yeah, so you had to keep the river free enough so that a well-fed 3-year-old pig could stand in sideways. And basically they're just saying, keep it about this open. They were just using pigs as a measurement. I'm surprised we don't have that now. That should have been a yard. A foot, a pig. That would have been good, right? So these are one of the early laws. But then what happened is we saw a transition of these laws into the Mill Acts. So whereas they used to kind of have that you had to keep things free of obstructions, and people actually had the right to go and physically remove your dam if you didn't do this. They could go in and just take it out. And that's how the law stood, that you could do that. The laws started transitioning with the advent of a lot of mills, that the laws now protect the mill owners, that the mills had a lot more rights to go in and to block things. Still, a lot of them were seasonally operated, but then we started getting certain kind of mills that weren't seasonally operated, that were year-round, and we got a lot more blockages on our system. So we saw this kind of early transition of laws. We talk about when's the peak of dam building. Well, there really are 2 different peaks of dam building in our country. One is for mill dams. We had an early peak of mill dam building in the early 1800s. By even the early 1900s, a lot of these mills were closing. This is mill closures. This is peak of mill dam building. And then we also have what we think of as the dam building era of the 1950s and the 1970s. These are our larger dams that went across. So now, not so much these small mill dams, but some of our water supply dams that happened, like what my grandfather was involved in. And we see a peak of dam building in the United States more in the 1950s through the 1970s is where we got the peak of kind of this larger scale nationwide dam building. So in the paper, I'm getting to kind of what happened at the beginning of this dam removal movement, when we started having more of a proactive dam removal movement. A lot of it brought around by environmental reasons. And at the beginning of this, I started removing dams in the mid-1990s. We didn't have anything. We didn't have any guidance. So one of the reasons why I ended up becoming an expert in this field is there were no experts before me. So I was a young engineer, like, okay, we're going to do a dam removal. Well, how do I write that study? What should I be looking at? Oh, look, there are no studies. I have no guidance. I had the environmental impact statement for the Elwha Dam was the only thing I had. It was this big and there were 3 volumes. So, and I'm trying to apply that to a 10-foot-high industrial dam in Connecticut. So we had no guidelines, we had no decision-making processes, we didn't know how to approach communities, what to say. I mean, I look at people now just getting into dam removal, and they go and they do some tremendous screw-up, you know, at the beginning of a project, and I'm thinking, are you kidding me? We know this already. Don't do that. Don't ever go and ask a community, so do you want to keep your dam? Of course, everyone wants to keep the status quo, you know, whatever. Yeah, don't mess with it. Don't. Yeah, but if you come to a community and say, hey, here are the economics of the issue here. We've got an unsafe dam. You know, here's the problems it's causing, this, that, and the other. Does anyone, the dam owner doesn't want this anymore. Does anyone want to take over the liability and the economic burden of this dam so that we can continue to maintain it for the community, even though it's not serving any economic purpose? You know, that's a better way to phrase the question there. You know, then people are going to be like, no, I don't want to, I don't want to take over the economic burdens of that. So we didn't have any funding sources, at least no good ones. We didn't have a network of people we could talk to about this. No leadership. So at the beginning, we just had to kind of figure it all out on our own. And it was a very taboo subject. It still is. We go into communities. It's kind of a shocker to bring this up. I always say to people that, you know, people say, what do you do for a living? Oh, I remove dams. I feel like saying, oh, and by the way, I can eradicate rainbows and unicorns, all at no extra cost. I'm just going to come in, take your waterfall out, because everyone thinks the dam is a waterfall, and I'm going to get rid of all your unicorns and all your rainbows. So people think that I'm a waterfall remover. My kids think I'm a waterfall remover and are not very interested in the subject. They think what I do is about the most boring thing on the face of the earth. I figured out a way to get paid to kayak. You know, that's pretty good. Okay, so I broke the drivers. One of the cool things about documenting dam removal right now and this movement right now is it's still all happening. And all these drivers still apply right now. So it's a lot easier to be the historian of a living movement because we can still ask all these people things. They're all still alive. We can talk to people. And I love talking to people, so it works out well. So what I've broken this down into on the drivers are three different drivers. Market issues, this is our socioeconomic issues, just the number of dams, dam safety issues, liability issues, the science issues, the understanding the impacts of dams and the benefits of removal, and the policy issues, our regulations and our policies that govern dam removal and river restoration. So if we kind of go through these, I feel like any movement is started by the fringe groups, by the people who all seem like wackos at the beginning. Sometimes when the environmental movement goes really far and someone says, oh yeah, those Greenpeace people, you know, they're tying themselves to stuff and blah, blah. But the extreme edge of the envelope pushes everyone else, brings everyone else to a good spot. So it's these kind of extremists at the beginning that help us. One of those extremists is Henry David Thoreau, believe it or not. Henry David Thoreau was involved in a project called the Billerica Dam. He was the surveyor on the project. The dam was built in 1710. There was a controversy and lawsuits since day one. It was removed it had a lawsuit a year later, which it lost. It was removed about 3 or 4 times. It was rebuilt, was taken out by force. It had all these things. It lost every lawsuit it was in and was ordered removed. And yet it still exists today. It was rebuilt again. It's still an issue today. But Henry David Thoreau, about 30 years before he was the surveyor on that dam, had gone out canoeing the river with his brother, the Concord River with his brother. And he wrote this wonderful prose about the river, and I'm going to read this one because it's one of my favorites. He says, and some of this is edited, but poor shad, where is thy redress? When nature gave the instinct, gave she thee heart to bear thy fate, still wandering the sea in thy scaly armor to inquire humbly at the mouths of rivers, if a man has perchance left them free for thee to enter. This is my favorite part coming up here. Armed with no sword, but mere shad, armed only with innocence and a just cause. I for one am with thee, and who knows what may avail a crowbar against the Billerica Dam. So that was 1839 and 1860. Again, he was in the court case where the lawyer said this quote here, which I love. He said, "For generations, a painful and expensive controversy has existed in relation to the Billerica Dam. And if not removed now, the children and children's children of these parties will be strifed with contention, will be cursed with strife and contention." And I love this because we are still debating the fate of the Billerica Dam. We are still arguing over its potential removal. Other kind of early crazy talk, there was the great first dam graffiti. There was, of course, a few after these, but this one was great with John Muir's quote, "Free the rivers" on the O'Shaughnessy Dam. There was, of course, the Monkey Wrench Gang, which talked about going and blowing up dam infrastructure and other infrastructure. They just seemed anti-infrastructure in general on that particular group. We really haven't gotten that far. But even though this was kind of crazy talk at the time, it started making more and more sense because it had some economic sense. We had aging infrastructure issues. So this crazy talk started becoming a little bit more acceptable. Although, as I said, here's the children's children still cursed with strife and contention. We have people willing to get naked to save their dam, to repair the dam. We have people who leave me nice little signs on my projects, so kind of them. And then we have people willing to get just as equally naked to try to stop a dam or to try to remove a dam, just as passionate, willing to put on the fish suit, willing to, again, I think one of these was my boss, that one right there. I didn't know she had a tattoo like that on her back, but it does look a lot like her. So, it was like, oh, really? Okay. So we get into, again, these drivers, and one of the biggest drivers is just the sheer number of dams. So dams are infrastructure. They're only going to last so long. We have an enormous amount of dams in the country. Matter of fact, we don't know how many dams we have in this country. A lot of people act like they know because they quote the National Inventory of Dams. National Inventory of Dams is just larger dams, like dams that are like 25 foot and higher or have a larger reservoir. These are ones on an Army Corps list. It is in no way a list of all the dams in this country. Then we have our dam safety lists that have more dams included, but every state defines a dam different. Some states define a dam as, again, 25 foot and higher, some 30 foot and higher, some 6 foot and higher. Some states have culverts. Actually, I only know of one state that includes culverts. But so there's this wide, this big unknown. We have really no idea how many dams we have, but it's a whole lot more than what we're seeing up here. Now, is it several million? There was one report that said that. I went into this. It comes from a 2.5 million number that they had in that report. That is definitely not the inaccurate number. That was a guy died who wrote that report in the middle of writing that report. He was talking just about the number of projects that NRCS had worked on. He's not talking about the total number of dams in the country. He guessed because of that maybe it was several million that existed in the country, but it was just kind of a random guess. So we don't know. Alabama doesn't even have a dam safety program, so obviously we don't have a good count in Alabama. We don't have a good count of small dams, as we know. But we do know we have an aging problem. A lot of these dams were built quite some time ago, and we are not that great at maintaining them. American Society of Dam Safety Officials, which I am a member of, exciting group, has this record of dam failures. Now, it shows clearly that the dam failures are increasing rapidly. Some of that could be reporting mechanisms. I think we have better reporting mechanisms now. There's still tons of dam failures that go unreported. I just checked for one series. It was 2 storms in a row within about 2 months of each other in New England. And I don't think any made the dam safety list. And yet there were 408, I think, dams that were damaged or overtopped during those storms. And at least 11 were complete failures. And none of that was documented. So just regularly, any small storms, there's a lot of small dams that are breaching as we move forward. This is fatalities, and what you see are some of the bigger events creating a lot of the fatalities. That's Johnstown, obviously the most famous dam breach. Still the highest death toll, I think, of any disaster, natural disaster in America. And Katrina. So the ASDSO also puts out a report card for dams in America, and we're doing very poor. They give us a D consistently. The number of deficient dams is definitely on the increase. Even as far as recently as 2013, they have another report card coming out soon this year, I think. But as their last one in 2013 had $57 billion needed for the dam repairs in the U.S. They also show us that most of the dams in the U.S. are privately owned. So that's a problem when we're talking a price tag like that, because I can guarantee you that the private ownership don't want to do that. A lot of this aren't companies like you'd think. A lot of these are inherited dams that don't serve an economic purpose anymore. And yet there's a large price tag with repairing them. No one wanted to admit owning this one, by the way. Everyone was like, I don't know. So one of my favorites, of course, I love John Oliver in general, but this is one of his quotes. He does this great piece on infrastructure. He says, infrastructure is like Legos. Building is fun, destroying is fun, but a Lego maintenance set would be the most boring frickin' toy in the world. He didn't say frickin'. It comes built, then you maintain it, and if you do it right, nothing happens and eventually you die. So no one wants to maintain dams. Building them is cool, it's kind of exciting, it's kind of fun, right? You name people after it. No one names the maintenance after it. Oh yeah, that's the Grand Coulee maintenance plan. Isn't that awesome? That's, so we're not good at maintaining infrastructure across the board. Apparently, other than roads, because we're all using them, so we put a lot of money into roads. There also aren't enough giant bored children to stand and look over our dams in the country, so we're just not keeping an eye on these very well. Someone thought I actually made that graphic. They were like, that is amazing that you projected a shadow of a girl like that on. No, believe it or not, it's amazing when you Google things online, right? I'm like, oh, okay, I don't even know what I Googled, but all of a sudden a shadow of a giant girl over a dam came up, and I'm like, that's exactly the picture I need right now. Okay, so the impacts of a dam. So there are a lot of impacts. This is another big driver because we started learning more about these impacts. When my grandfather built those dams, they didn't care much about the environmental impacts. They were looking to supply water to the desert and create cities. They didn't know much about putting a dam in, its impacts on sediment regimes and on fisheries, so they just put them in. So we started learning more. Some of the obvious things, here's a free-flowing river, and now a free-flowing river has turbulent flow patterns, has natural substrate, has a natural temperature regime. It transports sediment, obviously, as well as water. I think that's an important thing that a lot of people forget, although I'm sure this crowd knows it. It transports debris and nutrients, and obviously aquatic organisms, upstream, downstream, move around, ability to get away from predators or bad things that are happening in the river. And then we go and put a dam on it. And when we put a dam on it, a few things happen. It's going to be pretty obvious. First of all, we create a pond behind the dam, and we can have stratification of that pond. That impacts a lot of things, the stratification, if it does stratify. We change the temperature regime, we change evaporation, we change the temperature downstream as well, because anything we do up in the impoundment also has cascading effects downstream, so we can modify temperatures downstream. We can change the water quality within the impoundment. This is a big one now. It's coming up a lot more for dam removal for use in TMDLs, trying to get that to a spot that we want, and then impacting water quality downstream as well. Altering the flow regime, trapping debris, nutrients, obviously trapping sediment, both fine grain and coarse grain sediments going through the system, accumulation of pollutants within the sediments themselves, and as many of you know, when you trap sediment here, you create clear water conditions downstream of the dam. That clear water condition now, the river is trying to eat up the banks in the river to regain that sediment load that balances the river in equilibrium. So we get impacts, cascading geomorphic impacts downstream of a dam as well. And of course we block fish. And that's what everyone thinks I do for a living. They think, oh, I take them out just because of the fish. But it's really not. It's because dam removal is this way to restore a river on a much larger scale than that. There's so many different things that the dams are impacting. Out in the west, it's especially evident, the sediment issues. And a lot of research was done on this to start changing people's minds relating to dams. The first graph here, should have come up there, right. I mean, you just see when Hoover Dam went in. Obviously, it changed the hydrology of the system, the flows, but it really changed the sediment. I mean, just dramatic difference in sediment load after the dam went in because it was trapping everything. And then we see on this one, they're looking at downstream impacts on the Davis Dam. And because of, again, the sediment trapping behind the dam, they ended up having 19 foot of streambed degradation down below the dam. So picture the disconnect that does to the floodplain and everything else and kind of the cascading effects moving downstream. And then this study looked at a series of dams. And again, that down cutting and river narrowing downstream of a series of dams to the point where it was a 90% reduction in the channel width below the dams. So pretty significant when we're talking especially in the West Coast. And then we also saw, yes, a dramatic decline in fisheries relating to all the obstructions that we place in the river systems. There's a lot of data out there on this. We, of course, very early on worked with fishways, trying to put fishways on systems to make this up, but we never really were successful on that. And I explain it this way. This is a fishway, okay? This is what we think we're getting with a fishway. And a lot of people say, it's no problem, put the dam in, we'll just put a fishway in, right? That's all you're really concerned about. First of all, it's not all I'm really concerned about. But let's say it was all I was concerned about. They think it's this. They think, okay, the fishway's going to pass everyone. Seniors, junior, babies, all different walkers, bikers, everything else, all different species. We got good diversity here, really good passage. This is really what we're getting. I want to put my family on this. My mom, dad, the little ones, a few babies. See how many make it across. Got a few hardy few that are going to make it across on that. Going to dangle, but they're going to make it across. But a lot aren't. A lot of smaller ones aren't going to make it. A lot of older ones aren't going to make it. Different species aren't going to make it. This is pretty much where we are with fish passage in America right now and worldwide. That's about our best fishway. A lot of the research is supporting that. I took that slide out. I was only able to narrow down one slide, David. I just took that one slide out. I was talking about the research, but I'm not going to get into it. So when we talk about the beginning of really what started to have this kind of proactive dam removal movement, we can talk about some of the early regulations that came in. Really laid the ground for where we are now. And here are just a few. The Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act, which really required equal consideration of coordination of wildlife issues on things. We had Earth Day come in 1970, 1972, the Clean Water Act really started changing how people thought about rivers. The Endangered Species Act, especially in the West, really started making people say, well, we are not restoring or even maintaining our fish populations with these dams, and now we're going to start applying the Endangered Species Act to try to get some dams out, to look at dam removal. There was a series of electric consumer types of acts. The Electric Consumer Act of 1986 there increased the importance again of environmental considerations. The 1988 Federal Power Act also, you had to have comprehensive plans you had to fit everything into a comprehensive plan for the watershed. A lot of these also required fishways for the first time. So we started seeing some really changes in these regulations. So now if we get back to that graph we looked at earlier, but we talked specifically about political receptivity to change. And this comes from that book I was showing you today, David. He didn't have it laid out this same way, but Lowry, 2003. If we start with review what we just kind of went through, we had kind of the Fish Acts, transferring to the Mill Acts. Then we have kind of this crazy talk period, but at least it's being suggested. And then we had the reality of the socioeconomic drivers of the numbers of dams, of the aging of dams, and the cost for maintaining them. And then we got this research on dams and their impacts, started learning more about that. Then we got the basis of what I would really say the beginning of all this is the regulations that came out after the 1970s, setting the stage for better environmental approaches. Those regulations then leading to policies where now we could potentially tolerate change in how we're going to move forward dealing with dams. So here is the timeline that I laid out. This is the beginning of it. First I list just those earlier regulations that we've already gone through. We talk that there were many dams that were being removed for other reasons prior to us starting to keep track of dam removals. But really, the beginning of what we saw comes from California in the Northwest. We started seeing dams being taken out for some environmental reasons out there. Between a series of dates kind of between the 40s and the 80s, 90s, California had looked at 47 dam removals in that time period, and a lot were looking at endangered species issues or fisheries issues of some type. And even some were looking at balanced settlement agreements. The Butte Creek here was a FERC settlement agreement that looked at removing some dams while improving hydropower on a different system. So they were actually looking at multiple systems there. So we start seeing some of these settlements. Did they actually, oh, I thought I showed the after pictures of that, but it didn't come up. Unless I went backwards. No, I didn't. Okay, so one of the biggest pivotal points, I think, to the start of this was the discussion of the Elwha Dam. The discussion of the Elwha Dam removal. This started a long time ago. I know we just recently saw this come out. But the early discussions of that, remember when I said I started in dam removal and there was no guidance? The only thing I had were the EIS, environmental impact statements from the Elwha Dam. So they were already seriously looking into the removal of the Elwha dams. And the reason why this one really kind of led the charge was because it had real strong tribal connections. So what happened is the tribes in that area finally got federal recognition. And once they got federal recognition, they had a Supreme Court case that said that they had the right to half of the fish in that system. Well, the fish were being blocked in that system entirely. The tribes right after that in the mid-1980s started being the first people, along with the environmental groups, to say, we want to talk about dam removal. And now this was, again, this kind of crazy talk. It was such a huge scale. No one had even really heard much about those California ones I was telling you about in the Northwest. And the idea to talk about this, the reason I know about the California ones is because in preparation of this, Brian Winter didn't want it to seem like such crazy talk. He wanted to show that people were doing it already. So he wrote the report that listed these other dam removals that had happened already in the region. That's how we know about that. And by 1992, Congress authorized the purchase of these two dams for removal. But it took quite some time, as you all probably know, because we just removed them now. So this brackets dam removal to me, the proactive dam removal movement. The beginning of Elwha and it coming out seemed to bracket the primary evolution of the movement. So this gets into the Electric Consumers Act, which we already mentioned, kind of one of the earlier acts for this. I got to kind of watch my screen to see what happens. Sometimes nothing's happening. Okay. Secretary of State Bruce Babbitt, who we'll talk about in a little while, has a whole series of quotes that basically is talking about, he says, dams that were clearly justified for their economic value at one time gradually gave way to projects built with it. Well, I misread that, right? Economic value gradually gave way to projects built with excessive taxpayer subsidies, then justified by dubious cost-benefit projections. So this is the big thing. I talked to a few of you today about this thing, this dubious cost-benefit projections. They were really limiting what they looked at on cost-benefit analysis, really only towards the economic side of things, not the environmental impacts of things. And what I'm hoping your effort now does is looks at a more balanced cost-benefit analysis when we're talking about what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. The O'Shaughnessy happened soon after in 1987. That was the graffiti on that. Wisconsin really took over being the leader on a state level for small dam removals. The reason why they were so successful, here's a series of theirs, is they had a really strong, a really strong dam safety program. So their dam safety program basically said, if you're not maintaining your dam, we can make you remove it. And what they did is they would go to communities and they would first say, does anyone want to economically take over this? If someone raised their hand and said they did, they would check their situation to see if they could afford to do that. If they could afford to do that, they would let them take over ownership of it. If they couldn't and they could not find another owner that was able to take care of it, they would go in and remove the dam. And they did a lot of this with state staff. So they were getting things done very inexpensive as well. That made a big difference. They also had some real strong NGOs, Wisconsin River Alliance kind of leading the charge there as well. The other Federal Power Act that I talked about, requiring comprehensive plans. And then the Edwards Dam. Now this one, a lot of you are going to be a lot more familiar with. The Edwards Dam seeks relicensing in 1989. So they start talking about that they just want to relicense. They're not talking about removal yet. The Edwards Dam ended up being a very interesting case because it was the first case in a FERC relicensing where they required the removal of the dam. It had been brought up before. I believe the Clyde River, if any of you are familiar with that, in Vermont, had some leanings as well as far as removal during the relicensing process and also ended up removed. But this was the first time they had really required it. They denied the application for relicensing and basically said you need to remove the dam because it's causing more environmental damage than its economic benefits. So this was the first time. Now, this was around the time period that I was getting involved in dam removal. And a lot of us at that time really thought this was going to set the stage for this happening a lot. It did not. It hasn't happened. This was it. This is the one so far. But we had thought it was maybe going to happen more after this. But this case, it was pretty obvious that removal made more sense. That's the site removed. Okay, now American Rivers has started keeping track of dam removals in the country. So over the next 10-year period, we see 445 dams being removed. And if we keep on following the Elwha story along the bottom of the timeline here, by 1992, Congress authorized the purchase of the Elwha dams. And by 1993 to 2001, we had something very nice happen. We had a very pro-dam removal Secretary of the Interior come up. And although you would think, okay, he was just really like to remove dams, it's not true. What he was fondest of was these settlement agreements. He was really fond of balanced FERC settlement agreements that looked at environmental issues and economic issues. So the ones he was really getting behind were these kind of balanced approaches. He was definitely not a remove all dams type of guy, which none of us are, at least I sure am not. But he really understood the benefits of removal. And he started bringing his sledgehammer to the sites. Here was another relicensing. So a lot of the ones that he was involved in, the Menominee, there was another relicensing agreement where they removed some and kept others. My first dam removal project was the Naugatuck River project, and the reason why I put it up here, it was one of the earlier ones where we were looking at a series of dams all in a row. So on this, we were looking at 6 different dams on the system here. We ended up removing 5 of them and putting a bypass channel around another one, and pretty much opening up the entire river system. Although, as we could guess, the tricky point, the bypass channel isn't working so great. So again, the technical solution, the solution that wasn't with removal, is where we're having problems, and that's the lowest in the system. So keeping kind of a weary eye on that. That's what's happening right here, and we're trying to correct it. But that's kind of our Achilles heel. But we couldn't fully remove that one because look, they built a highway and connected it to the back of the dam. So removing it meant considering rebuilding the entire highway. So that was our problem with that one. I will say in retrospect, with a lot of things I've been involved in, I almost feel like we just need to learn how to take steps back and let the kettle boil a little bit longer. Sometimes we want to do something right then, and maybe the best thing would have been to say, well, when does that bridge need to be redone? All bridges need to be redone at some point. Is it in the next 20 years? You know, maybe we can prioritize this project like that. But that's a very hard thing to do when you're advocates for river restoration and you're trying to constantly move forward, to take steps back to say, well, that dam owner doesn't want to remove it, but he's also 95. So there was a seventh dam, and we tried to remove it, and the dam owner didn't want us to, and now he's in jail. So now, not because of that, he's in jail just because he's not a very nice person for other reasons, and so now maybe there's a new opportunity to go back up there. You know, that one's in jail. Let's see what the next one feels like. So here's the removals of these, the bypass channel at the Ting. Okay, then in 1997, we got one of our first guidelines, although this was specifically on decommissioning hydroelectric dams, so it didn't really apply a lot to the smaller kind of ones that I was working on. In 1997, if we follow the Edwards stories here, this is where they denied the relicensing of the Edwards Dam. And then Pennsylvania kind of takes over the lead. Wisconsin had been leading for a while, a decade or more, actually about 15 years. And then Pennsylvania takes over the lead. And the reason why Pennsylvania was so successful with small dam removals is they had a plan, they had a program, they created a state program. And they started systematically removing dams to try to restore fisheries up the system, and really emphasizing dam removal over fishways if it was possible. And I have a little bit of a list, shows them taking over. They created a streamlined permit system that made it a lot easier to remove dams in Pennsylvania. They had, again, an active dam safety program that played a role in this. The Fish and Boat played probably the most proactive role in dam removal. And they had a state funding source, because Pennsylvania takes lots of people's contaminated waste. So they get paid for taking that contaminated waste, and they use that money to do environmental projects. So, I mean, you know, it's kind of a balancing act, right? One of the things they did that I really liked, though, is they required posting of all small dams. They had multiple very small dams where there had been deaths at the site, boaters that thought, you know, oh, we can shoot this, it's a 4-foot high dam, we can shoot this, got stuck in the roller, ended up drowning. So they decided that people were underestimating how unsafe small dams were. So they required every dam owner, dinky little dams even, to put this sign up. Well, you can imagine going out there as a dam owner. This is like a sue me sign. Like, okay, I have to post that you could potentially die on my property. And at the same time, the Fish and Boat Commission sent them a little letter saying, hey, if you feel like removing your dam, let us know. Give us a call. They got a lot of people calling. We're in a similar situation right now. We've just changed our dam safety laws in a lot of states in New England, requiring a lot more things from the owners. Now they have to pay for their own inspections. They have registrations. There's a lot of things going on right now in dam safety that are making people really worried about dam ownership. I got a call just right before I left on Friday. A dam owner owns it half and half with another dam owner, and now he's required, when he sells his property, to disclose that there's a high hazard dam on his property that has all these requirements for inspections and needs an emergency action plan to show how to evacuate people downstream if his dam were to breach. He can't sell his home. His neighbor can't sell. They can't sell their homes because it's tied to now much more understanding of the risks of dam ownership. So it's a good time to send out those letters again. That's the removal of those. So back to the timeline. We continue on. We get University of Wisconsin started their dam removal course, which I was lucky to be involved in for about 15 years. Bruce Babbitt involved in, again, a bunch of relicensings where he went out, brought his sledgehammer with him. We even got the military involved in some, where they would go out for maneuvers to practice, to learn how to use the equipment. They would go out and remove the dams. Win-win. Let's see. Then we had, in 1999 and through 2002, two big efforts looking at policy and science issues associated with dam removal. The Aspen Institute came out with one, the Heinz the other. Heinz focused very much on science, kind of a list of scientific papers. David, you had a paper on that, right? And then this one was the one I was involved in. It was very policy related, getting people together to decide what would be good policy for dam removal. We had the Condit agreement happen in 1999. This one, because of those environmental regulations I was talking about earlier, it ended up kind of creating the perfect storm of saying, hey, this dam doesn't make sense anymore. It's going to be too expensive for us to put fishways on. You know, too many things are happening here because of the new regulations that don't make sense for us to continue to have the dam. So the dam owner paid for the full removal of the Condit Dam. We had a series of conferences that started bringing the network together more. We had American Rivers come out with their success stories. Now the Edwards comes out in 1999. A pretty amazing moment for those of us who were involved to actually see that one come out. Over the next 5 years, another 166 dams come out according to American Rivers list. Had a few more workshops. World Commissions on Dams report showed how devastating dams can be globally. Another video from American Rivers. And American Rivers formally started their program around 2000, right around when I joined them, and created a dam removal program at American Rivers. They started keeping track of the dams removed. But really, right now, I don't want anyone to get too thinking, okay, we're removing tons of dams. We're actually still building more dams than we're removing dams. So, you know, we are removing a lot of dams for environmental reasons right now, but we're also building a lot of dams still too. So it's dam building, as far as I can tell, is still outpacing. The recent numbers, it's getting a little closer, but it's still pretty much outpacing. We had the bioscience come out. I don't remember if you weren't in on the bioscience one. You were, right? Or I don't know if you were involved in both. Taunton, these were some dam breach scares. We had a dinky little dam in Massachusetts, near Fail in Massachusetts, and it started getting politicians like, wait a second, even these small dams, they had to evacuate 2,000 people, and it turned out really not to be a big issue, but they didn't have any data, so they evacuated all these people. That same night, this one came a whole lot closer, and no one even heard about it. I found out about it later by the guy who said, you know, I was the maintainer on this, and this dam almost blew that night. And no one down below this dam knew about this. They were not evacuated. It came a lot closer. It actually had an overtopping of the earthen section. When the investigation finally was done as to the emergency dam breach area down below, it turned out 72 homes were in that zone. And the first handful of homes just would have been completely destroyed. So would have been for sure deaths on that. But it didn't end up breaching, thank God. NOAA started its Open Rivers Initiative, so we got some funding sources associated with it. We got another guideline on sediment dynamics. Another 243 dams come out. The Milltown Dam is removed. Then we get another guidelines coming out. The Marmot Dam's removed. Another 296 dams come out. The Matilaha graffiti, which some of you are familiar with, the zipper line, which is now the symbol for the European barrier removal program that's going on. And let's see, and Elwha is finally removed. So that's kind of our bookend. And dramatic as it is, Elwha, just absolutely amazing dam removal. And Gutsy is all out contractor. And then we get the Condit Dam removed that we mentioned earlier. That was pretty dramatic too. I don't know about you, but we had a party at my house and did the countdown for the explosion. That one's a pretty amazing one as well. Damnation came out. That brought a lot of attention recently. And then San Clemente is now just finishing up removal. out in California. That's the San Clemente. So here's the timeline altogether, and if we were going to summarize this, I think we'd look at it this way. We had to start with these proactive environmental regulations that laid the groundwork for this movement. We went into dreaming big and looking at some huge dam removals, but they were going to take a long time to do. So in the meantime, we were succeeding with a lot of small dam removals, getting people more comfortable with the concept of removal as not just a wingnut solution, but as maybe a good economic solution. We started developing programs. Now we have a lot of state programs that have been developed for this issue. We had policies and publications come out that started educating the populace and the people working on these types of projects. And then finally those big dreams started turning into actual removals coming out. And now we're in the phase of researching these large removals. So that's kind of the reason why we're documenting this and trying to get it into this stage is because we're starting a dam removal movement right now in Europe. And although environmentally they're very progressive in certain things on dam removal, they're pretty far behind us. And so we're trying to kind of lay out what worked here and can we kind of simulate something similar over in Europe right now. I'm part of a project in Europe called the AMBER project. It's called Adaptive Barrier Management. You know, how come the, okay, I'm not even going to go there. So maybe I have the orders of these. But let's call it Adaptive Barrier Management on European Rivers. Must be Adaptive Management of Barriers on European Rivers. We really always call it AMBER, so I kind of forget this thing. We're doing a few things. We're trying to do an inventory of dams in Europe. They don't have any right now, not anything like we have over here. We're trying to come up with decision support system tools, including that atlas and other tools that are being worked on right now, and investigating methods to resolve conflict on these issues. And they're doing a lot on balancing these hydro issues as well. That's a big concern of theirs. The Powell Center, if you're not familiar with it, this work is great. They combined all the dam removal data, research data, into one big database, and now any of us can search this and look at things from this. A bunch of publications coming out of the Powell Center right now. Your guys' effort going on here in New England. And then, if you don't know about it, the White House has started an initiative on dam removal in the last maybe 6 to 8 months. I don't know where that's going to go now with the whole big surprise. But there is an initiative started. We'll see. I mean, if we spin it enough out on the infrastructure issues, who knows? The Hewlett Foundation came out last week, I think it was last week or the week before, with $50 million that they're putting towards dam removal in the West. So a lot of money going in from a foundation. And this is the list that I put together for David, although I'm sure I'm running low on time. He had said, you know, what do we need now? You know, what kind of research do we need now? So I wrote down kind of a list of just what came to the top of my head. One thing is we do really need a true economic analysis of dams and dam removal. We don't have good ones. We don't have ones that really look at putting values to the environmental resources that are impacted, yeah? We don't have a lot of economics on small hydro. A lot of people on small dams say, oh, well, I want to put hydro on there. But they don't understand all the capital costs, the relicensing costs, and everything else. We need more, I'd like to have like a graph. I was telling some folks today, a chart, where we can say, okay, it's a 7-foot high dam. You got this kind of power potential. It's basically going to be an 80-year payback period, approximately, based on these other 50 dams similar to yours that have been studied. Is that really what you're talking about? Are you willing to wait 80 years before you even get a dime back on this? It would be great to have some information on this. I'd like us also to team that with looking at hydro options that don't require a dam. So hydrokinetic turbines don't require a dam. In-conduit turbines and water and sewer systems under our streets don't require dams. So there are ways we can harness hydro on a very small scale without a small dam in place. Risk communication. We saw how important that was in Pennsylvania, that posting of those safety signs. I think there's a lot more we need to do as far as risk communication to bring people to the table, the stakeholders to the table to say, this makes sense. You know, this is something I care about. The social context. When I was at Aspen, when we came in and that policy piece, it was like, oh, are you pro or anti-dam removal? It was like everyone had one side. By the end of 2 years of talking, there was no pro or anti anything. We were all in agreement together. We need to do that with society too. We need to not make this a pro or anti anything or a conservative or liberal anything. We need to make it just kind of a common sense thing to think about. Regulatory inconsistencies, I could talk about this for decades. We just have a lot of increased hassles in the regulatory community without some kind of increased benefit, just kind of adding complexity. Too expensive. Dam removals can be too expensive. A lot of times they're trying to shift the risks over to the consultants and the contractors, and therefore our knee-jerk reaction is to bring up our prices. Because all the risk on this are going to be on us. We're going to have to bring up our price to cover the potential for that. We were talking about developing of effective partnerships before. This really has to do with the fact that I've been involved in a lot of projects with a lot of partners, and sometimes it seems like they're really just adding more complexity than they are kind of a swifter solution. So it would be neat to kind of look at that. Transition of funding. A lot of our funding right now is environmental, but I don't think that's going to be the case in the future. I think we're going to have to be looking at infrastructure and safety funding, and I think we should be identifying that now. And then changing energy sources. I think, as energy itself changes, the need for potentially hydro and its impacts maybe not be as strong as that. And that is it. A little over because I was supposed to leave 15 minutes for questions.
So I won't be surprised if you people have to dash and go right ahead and do it, but Laura's here, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who want to know more about this and have their own ideas, and I would encourage you to hang out if you can, and for another 5 minutes or even longer if you want, we'll do some Q&A.
Laura, I have one question.
Yeah, sure.
When they reach the dam to Elwha, and Lake Mills is no more, did it affect the hot springs up above the lake?
I would not know that.
I know who knows.
I have looked at a lot of the results from Elwha. There's some great research on that right now. And of all the studies that I've looked at, there was not one hot spring study. I did not see a hot spring study. I know, they're focusing on things like sediment and fisheries. Anyone else?
How important is pollution in the sediments
Pollution in the sediments is absolutely critical, and actually this had to do with, remember I told you I was thinking of some things coming up here. One thing I think I could even produce right now to figure out is we looked at sediment contamination on every single one, and so we have all this data on the level of sediment contamination at each site. But it would be interesting now to combine that with the final cost estimates of the project to get a ratio of what you found in the sediment to final cost of the project, because it is the largest cost involved in the project. If you've got clean sediments and and there's not much of it, and you're allowed to let it go, a dam removal can be relatively inexpensive. If you've got contaminated sediments or a high quantity of sediment and it can't be released downstream, and you have to manage it off-site or bring it to a landfill, you bring up your costs very significantly. So I think we would see a pretty direct relationship between quality of sediment and project cost. On that one that I was talking about where the dam owner called me last week and said, we don't want this dam, but we can't sell our property. He really wants to just convince the folks upstream to do a lake association. He doesn't really want to do a dam removal. He lives on a pond. It's quite a pretty pond, to be quite honest, with all these beautiful multi-million-dollar houses around it. So I don't want to go too far into dam removal with him when I know he doesn't really want it, and for sure those other people don't want it. But they really should do this lake association. He's right. He can't sell his property. He doesn't want to keep this up forever. So what I'm doing is I'm staging it. I'm staging the first analysis to be just about the sediment. I'm doing this at another site in Connecticut as well, where we're just focusing on the sediment issues and coming up with general costs for removal based on that, because that is going to be our biggest expense. So it's really, really important. Yeah?
I just wanted to point out that there's another talk over in Hill Auditorium about whether Henry David Thoreau was a hippie or not. Going on right now.
Well, I
came to this
hope, normally, well, I believe it or not, I was trying to go quick on this one. Normally, I always bring up the beard selection because although, of course, I admire the man, just his beard choice, that neck beard. Every time I see it, I'm like, really? Neck beard? What made you do that? And like look in the mirror and say, yeah, the neck beard's looking really good today. So they might be reviewing the neck beard in that talk. Anyone else?
What are the possibilities of getting rid of Hetch Hetchy?
Well, it is being discussed. So Hetch Hetchy is being discussed. The cool thing about if Hetch Hetchy was ever removed is we have actual photographs of the valley and where the channel was and everything else. So we surely can set the vision of it. Another thing, much like I want to desperately remove the Billerica Dam because of Thoreau's vision, I would love to remove Hetch Hetchy because a lot of people believe it actually killed John Muir, of course, the entire battle and losing that battle. So it would just seem some kind of like environmental vengeance, to be able to remove it. But it is a big issue. I mean, that would be a hard one. Something like that's actively serving a water supply purpose. You would have to really show that there were other water supply methods that were going to be less expensive in the long run and make more sense. I think you'd have to make a really good economic argument for where you could get those sources of water. And that would be a very hard one to make out west right now.
Didn't somebody put the price tag at $2 billion?
Yeah, and it's not even just the cost of removal being expensive.
No, it's the water.
Right, it's the water supply, and in a drought-stricken area to discuss loss of a water supply impoundment right now. I mean, what's the saying they say out west? Something like
Mark Twain.
it's the water is something about shooting people
Whiskey's
and water.
for drinking waters.
Yes, whiskey's for drinking, waters for fighting. So I wouldn't want to be the on the forefront of that particular movement right now. But yeah, it's one of those push the envelope ones. I'm happy it's still being discussed, but it's a push the envelope one. Yeah.
I want to thank you for bookending with tribal influences,
Yeah.
especially today. Things are changing, permanently. But one of the things that it was before my time working for Penobscot Nation, but there was some work done to put an economic value on the Penobscot River. And when my boss participated in this, when people went to talk to tribal members about it, they were highly insulted to even think that you could put a dollar value on it. So one of the things I've learned being sort of trained in Western science and working with tribes is there's a real translation problem.
Yeah.
And so I don't disagree with you that there needs to be an economic value, although I struggle even with this in undergraduate school. It's like, let's just lump it all under externalities. Like, really? Come on, we need to think about these things. But then you get that perspective and you go, how do you talk about that? I mean, how do you talk about water protectors in North Dakota? It's not protesting. They're praying. They're not. It's a radically different perspective. And I think as a society we need to struggle with that because dollar is not everything. It just isn't.
I know. And I agree totally.
I don't know how to
But-
deal with it.
But I was raised in my dad's basket pack along the side of a river, and no one had to explain these values to me. It's like it's in me. It's part of who I am. But what I'm realizing is it's not in a lot of other people.
Right.
It's not, and it's probably not even close to in the majority of people. And because it's not there, when I'm talking to people completely void of that sense of either spirituality or connection to, the environment and how important things are, I find that that's the thing that they understand. So it's not that we ourselves need to prioritize that because we should be able to feel it and think of it that way. And we should be proud that we were lucky enough to have that.
Yeah.
But if we're going to get anywhere, sadly, we have to put it in their language too. So it is a translation thing. It's their language too. I have literally been kicked out of my sister-in-law's house for discussing environmental issues. She is void of any feeling or caring about the environment. She doesn't even understand how any of it relates to her whatsoever. And, I can't have a discussion with her on any of these subjects if I don't tie it to it.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it shouldn't be discussed. It's just hard to figure out I don't know how you explain it.
Well, and for those folks that feel it inside them, it seems kind of cheapening it by us happening to do that. But the thing is, if they didn't have the benefit of having it raised into you as part of who you are and part of what you care about. They didn't have that, so they just don't have that connection. I do find it interesting. I have bookend this a lot with Elwa because I do really believe it's at the beginning. And I have gotten that complaint in Europe of, oh, well, that's because you have tribal issues in America. But we don't have that here in Europe, so that's not the same kind of thing. Okay, maybe not the same way. It depends on where you are. Surely you do in Australia and stuff. It depends on where you are on that. But, yeah, it's an important part of the American story. And it's going to play a different role in Europe. But, yeah, it is interesting. They were kind of acting like, well, we can't do it the same way because we don't have that. And I'm like, it has played a large role, but it hasn't played a role in all of it.
Yeah, no.
I mean, all those state small dam removals and stuff like that. I mean, often the tribes are consulted, and normally they're very supportive, but it's not what made the whole thing happen. It's surely in America, though, what really started it.
It just doesn't get recognized often enough in
Yeah.
mainstream science, so I wanted to.
Yeah. Well, I wish we could actually just change the ethic too to have learned from the tribes as well. But unfortunately, folks like my sister-in-law do exist. So. Sorry, that's actually on film. I realize Pam's not going to be watching this. I'm sorry.
Can edit that out. Anything else?
What do you think the driving force for dam removal in the future will be? Like more on the safety liability side or fish restoration?
I think the driving force will remain with the leaders who are doing it, very environmental. I think there are a lot of us who feel real strong about this, and it's environmental. But I think we're not going to have to couch it that way. I think we're not going to have enough environmental funding. I mean, I think the recent election even just shows you that it's a bigger discrepancy than I had even realized there was. So I do think in order to make this sustainable and move forward, we're really going to have to go for infrastructure issues. We're really going to have to tie this to infrastructure dollars, aging infrastructure, safety, liability, and I hope to see a transition on that. To be quite honest, I'm a huge proponent on the risk communication side of things that I put up here, because that's what I think we really don't do well enough at all. And I think if we did risk communication a lot better, first of all, we live in a country where they're not required to tell you if you live in a dam breach inundation zone. So anywhere in this country, they are not required to tell you if you live in a dam breach inundation zone. Your name of your property might be on an emergency action plan. An emergency action plan are broken out into two scales. The ones where there will be deaths in the households and the ones where they won't. The people on the death list on an emergency action plan are not required to be told that they just bought a property in a dam breach inundation zone and their property is one of the ones that's at risk of potential death. And that seems crazy to me. So one of my bucket list items in my life has always been like, people talk about their bucket list. Oh, I want to see, Grand Canyon. I'm like, well, I want to improve risk communication such that people in dam breach inundation zones know they live in them. Like, that's kind of a weird thing for your bucket list. I'm like, yeah, but if we do that, if people understand, why when you sell a house are you required to say there's lead paint, but you're not required to say that if you potentially learn about dam ownership, that you own a dam with this, or that you're in a dam breach inundation zone. Of course you should be told this. We tell them that there's lead paint, but we don't tell them you're in a dam breach inundation zone. And only some states, like Connecticut and a few others, are requiring to say, oh, and a dam comes with this property, and here are the regulations for owning a dam. We just got that law like 2 years ago in Connecticut. And it's changing how people look at things. Now I'm getting calls from this guy distraught. Can you believe those new dam safety laws? Now I can't even sell my property. And I'm like, well, in actuality, risk communication is a good idea. I can understand where you're on the bad end of that right now. But, wouldn't have you liked to have known when you bought that property that it came with the ownership of a high hazard dam? So we don't want that to happen again. And if we can communicate that with folks, if we can get them to the point where they understand all these issues, and for example, like nuclear power plants, People within a certain zone of a nuclear power plant get regular annual updates on how it's been maintained and if there were any alerts or things like that that happen, anything, right? Well, I think people within dam breach inundation zones, least of high hazard dams, should get regular reports. And for example, if there is a dam out there that has an infraction against it, has an order against it for repair, there are dams out there that are high hazard dams, there's potential for loss of life, they have an order against them for repair and they're not responding to it, and none of those people in that dam breach inundation zone know that. Army Corps, okay, again on video, so, has a dam list of their 10 most dangerous dams. It's 10 nationally, and I forget what they call them. It's on one of my slide presentations. They've got a name for it. But when you read the definition of these 10, it means that they're already failing and that there will be catastrophic loss of life if they fail entirely. There's 10 of these. And when I talk about catastrophic, I mean, we're talking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in these dam breach inundation zones. And that information is only kind of slowly being released. Like they'll just take one and then, like Wolf Creek, that's the one I think they started with, and they'll tell that group. But it's not like they told everyone at once. So we live in a country where we're not requiring this kind of communication. And I think I might have even gotten on a no-fly list for about 2 years because I have spoken so publicly about this and upset people. But I really feel adamant that this is ridiculous, that we should be telling people. And if we do, we're going to get an informed community that's going to believe that we need to spend more money either repairing or removing dams that aren't being maintained. So if we can do that kind of communication, we can change kind of where we're going in the future. And again, it does not mean that I'm looking for all dams to be removed, but I'm sure looking for them to be maintained when they stay in, or removed if we're not using them for anything. So, I believe dams have been built on a public trust, and the idea that we never gave an end date, we just let them build them on a public trust, and we didn't say, oh yeah, this is for you can use the public trust for 10 years, but then not. We didn't. We gave them no closeout date, so people just left these dams in place. They just abandoned them and walked away. And they affect the public trust, and it seems like that should be, added in. Anyone else?
I'm reluctant to call things to a close, but I bet some people still need to go. Come on up to the front and hang out for longer if you want. I'm going to stay. And Laura is, so we've got a bit of time. But if you have to go, fine. And let's thank her one more time.